Isn't live.
Okay, we can start now.
Good evening, everyone here in the room, and also for those who are listening and watching us on the streaming on YouTube. Thanks so much for coming to today's session of the Trace lecture series. My name is Juliana Gonzalez. I'm gonna introduce her very briefly, and then we will listen to her talk, and then we will have some minutes for conversation and for questions you want to ask on the talk. So Judge Lily Rueda Guzman, since 2018, she has served as magistrate of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace in Colombia. She currently leads the macro investigation for recruitment and use of children, case 07. And she also co-leads the recently opened macro case for gender-based violence, which includes sexual, reproductive, and prejudice-based violence committed in the Colombian armed conflict. She is a doctoral candidate in law from Free University in Amsterdam, and she also holds a master's in criminal law and in international criminal law from Universidad Nacional in Colombia. She also worked as an advisor to the Ministry of Justice in Colombia, to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Colombia, and to different civil society organizations, such as the International Center for Transitional Justice. Thanks so much, Judge Rueda, for joining us tonight in Giessen, and we're very much looking forward to your talk. Can I use this one? Yeah. So thank you very much for the invitation in the first place. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. Thanks to Capaz for bringing me here, and thanks to the University of Giessen to give me the opportunity to talk to you a bit more about our work at the Special Jurisdiction for Peace in Colombia, and with a particular approach, the approach of gender-based. I'm quite, I don't know, something going to happen there in the camera. Yeah. So I was thinking to give you a couple of highlights of the work we do. I am aware that maybe this talk is followed also by people that are not really aware in depth of the Colombian conflict and the work that we do at in this new model of justice that we have, that is the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. So I would like to introduce some remarks on the general work that we do, and then we can go in depth a bit more about the case number 11, that, as was mentioned, was opened recently by the jurisdiction, which has a particularly very focused gender approach. But we also have other outcomes in other cases that we are investigating. So if you want, I can also give you a bit more of information about those cases. I would like to put in place where do we come from in the first instance. So as you know, in 2016, the Colombian government and the FARC-EP, FARC means Forced Armed Revolutionary Forces of Colombia. He was the main guerrilla group in the country, well, reached an historical peace agreement to end more than 50 years of war. And just for you to have an idea of the amount of victimization that we have in the country, now the data talks about more than 9.5 million of registered victims of different conducts and different violence in the country. So part of this agreement was to find a way in which the state could address this violence. And when I talk about this violence, I'm talking about particularly human rights violations, grave human rights violations, and also international crimes that have been committed for different parties to the conflict, by the state, by the military forces, by third parties, but also by the FARC, the guerrilla movement that I was talking about. And so
As part of this agreement, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace was created to provide a sort of justice response, and under one principle, which is the principle of the broadest amnesty possible. And also, of course, that we have to prosecute and to sanction great crimes, international crimes that were committed in the country. We are part of a comprehensive system integral system to satisfy victims' right to truth, to justice, to reparation, and to non-repetition. We are the justice parties of the whole system. So this is important to bear in mind, that we are not isolated. We work in a system, in a more broad system, and we provide for justice within the context of transitional justice. And when I say within this context, of course, you have to bear in mind particular characteristics of the conflict. First, we are talking about a negotiated peace. So this is very different when you try to achieve justice in a normal setting, even in an international tribunal, when you are not negotiating the outcome. But here we had, in 2016, the peace negotiation. And of course, you are going to be to see the reflection of that negotiation within the scheme that we are administrating now. What also you have to bear in mind, the character of the crimes. We have to face crimes that are widespread, collective, and politically motivated, and we have to respond to this type of crime. And we also operate in a political environment that is very particular. It's very particular for Colombia, but these are general features of transitional justice context. So you see that we have scarce resources to prosecute. We have impediments for the application of criminal prosecutions. We have other urgent social and economical problems that are usually competing for resources within the operation of the system. What is this? Well, this is a political transition and negotiated bit. And at the same time, we have to address the past, the crimes that were committed. We have to look into the future, because we are thinking on how to reconcile our society, how to move forward for violence. We talk about restorative sanctions. We talk about prospective measures. This means how to improve our society so crimes are not going to be committed again. That's why we talk about non-recurrence, for instance. So we have to look into the future. So we pursue broad societal goals. We want to foster democratization, reconciliation, and prosperity. So you can imagine how difficult the work of all the mechanisms within the comprehensive system is, and particularly the pursuing of justice within this type of setting of transitional justice setting. Just for you to have an idea of how complicated and complex, I would say complex more than complicated, the comprehensive system is, you have different institutions that were created with the peace agreement for justice, for truth, for reparation, and for non-repetition. And we are one part of that scheme. You also have a truth commission already finished its work 1 year ago, actually. You have a special unit for the search of those that were disappeared in the conflict. You have also a comprehensive reparation scheme that's a public policy in the country. And you also have different measures of non-repetition. And we operate inside it. We are the jurisdictional part of this agreement. And if you put a focus within the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, then you will see that we also have different mechanisms that we operate in different chambers. So for instance, I work in this first chamber, the chamber for the recognition of responsibility and truth, and for the determination of facts and conduct. But I also have colleagues that work for the Chamber of Amnesty and Pardon, because this was also agreed that amnesties were going to be provided for politically motivated crimes, for instance, not for great crimes. If you are facing a great crime, an international crime, crimes against humanity, war crime, it goes to my chamber, to the Chamber of Recognition or the Chamber of Acknowledgement. But also, you have other different parts of the institution. I'm not going to mention because we could spend hours talking just about the intricacies of the of the special jurisdiction for peace, I'm going to focus on how we work in terms of provide justice for the most grave conduct. So we have one principle within the chamber in which I work, the recognition chamber, is a dialogue-based process. This is not an adversarial process. This is not an ordinary criminal justice process. This is the first thing to bear in mind. This is a picture of the first public hearing that we had in the country, in which we had the recognition of responsibility and truth of a group of perpetrators. In case number 3, this is the case that is ordinarily called as the false positive cases. And then to the left, my left, you have the victims, and then we are in the administrative. To reach this point, we had to work for years to reach the point in which you can sit down victims, perpetrators, the magistrate, and you can see with the public. The people seeing the encounter of the narratives. And when I say this encounter, it's because, well, they could be different in the way they approach to the facts. And it is a process, it's a very complicated process, but this is what we are trying to achieve, that we can construct a narrative together about what happened, in which the perpetrators recognize their responsibility, the victims have that recognition, and feel dignified in this process. To have this took us something close to 5 years of work in this particular case. But this gives you an idea of how we operate. As I was telling you, the system is quite complicated and you can approach the system from different ways. I like to present 5 principles of operation of the system because I think can give you an idea of the basic operation of the system. The first is that amnesties are granted for politically motivated crimes and crimes in connection with those politically motivated crimes, as they are defined under domestic criminal law, and this includes the act of rebellion and the killing according to international humanitarian law. This part of the agreement goes to the amnesty chamber. So when you have crimes that are not grave or considered grave, you can give amnesties to this. This was part of the peace agreement. But what happens with the crimes cannot be legally amnestied? So they should be investigated and punished. And this gives us the competence within my chamber to operate. And we are talking about genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, as defined in international criminal law. And then, in the third place, when you think, who do we prosecute? So we prosecute state agents, former guerrilla members, third parties that directly or indirectly participate in the commission of international crimes, but not all of them. We are very aware of the possibilities that we have, the scarce resources, including time, including financial resources. We are not here to provide an answer to every and each crime committed within the conflicts against every and each possible perpetrator. What we do is that we target groups of perpetrators, particularly those considered to be the most responsible of the most grave and representative crimes. So we select and we prioritize conduct and possible perpetrators. Of course, this is something that is controversial. It was very controversial at the beginning of the negotiation. Because when you think about justice, you not necessarily think about this type of scheme in which you accept that you have limits, that you have realities, that you have a transitional context, and you have to further goals for the future. And then brings me to the fourth principle, that is, when you think about the future, we think also about restoration of the harm caused by the crimes. And we have a particular procedure that could end in restorative sanctions. It is not a procedure, as I was telling you, that is ordinary, it's not adversarial, It's not only the process that we administrate in a different manner, it is also the outcome of that process that we administrate in a different manner. And what is the outcome? Something that with the Spanish called the sanción propia. In English, I would say restorative sanction, but if you find in the literature, it's sanción propia. It's something special from the tribunal. And it means that those find the most responsible, the most grave and representative crimes are not necessarily going to finish up in jail. The privation of liberty is not the first outcome when you think of our form of administrating justice. What happened? What happened? If a person actually acknowledged the truth and the responsibility that we as a chamber find in the charges that we present before this person at their defense, they have the possibility to go through a different path, which is the path of a restorative sanction. This sanction is going to be designed and constructed by the tribunal with the participation of the victims and with the participation of those found guilty in a sentence. This doesn't mean that we don't have individual criminal responsibility, because we actually have to finish up the process in a sentence in which we name the crimes that were committed, we name the responsible for the crimes, we follow the process, but then we present a project, a different possibility as the outcome of this process. The question is, what happens if the person disagrees with the tribunal? The defendant says, I don't agree with what you're saying. I didn't commit these crimes. Or things happened, but I wasn't responsible for those. Because then you have also a lot of criminal law involved in terms of attribution of liability or the evidence that you have to present before the defense. We have to do all the work in this way. So then the tribunal opens a different path for this person. And this path is going through an adversarial traditional process that the outcome of this path could be up until 20 years of jail. So this is the incentive, the mechanism as was created. I'm giving you, of course, like a very, very general picture of this. It could get a bit more complicated than this. And the fifth principle, in order to understand a bit a first approach to the system, is that the participation, if you are a defendant, we call them comparecientes. In English, I'm going to say defendant so you understand, but we don't use this term in Spanish because comparecientes means someone that comes forward to the tribunal. It's not necessarily the person that is defending himself or herself before the tribunal. So in Spanish, we call them comparecientes. And they have the participation in a conditional manner, meaning that they have to fulfill some of the conditions that we administrate. And what are the conditions? That they have to contribute to the pursuit of justice, of truth, and accountability, and reparation in different ways. So we are monitoring all the time the behavior of the people, of the defendants that are coming before the tribunal. And if we find that some conditions that we put in place are not met, then we can expel the person from the tribunal. You know? So it's a constant balance, I would say, the work that we do in between try to achieve justice, to give the most possible justice that we can offer, but also to facilitate the reintegration and the participation of these persons within the Colombian society, even before they are sentenced, and even if they are not sentenced, because they are not found the most responsible. So this is important to bear in mind when you think about the cases and about what we are doing here. For instance, this is a picture of a dialogue, a hearing with Mancuso. It was held recently. He was recently accepted to jurisdiction. Also very controversial decision for the country. But this is to give you an idea how we talk to the different parties. So this is a hearing that we were having with him. He is in jail in the United States, and he was disclosing well, facts and evidence about violence that was perpetrated in the conflict. And here also you have an example of how we talk to the victims. This is, for instance, part of the case I'm investigating. These are special hearings that I have with female victims in the case. This would be survivors of recruitment of children or mothers, sisters, families from kids and children that were disappeared in the conflict because they were recruited, and the families are still looking for them. So we administrate this in different ways. We try to communicate with them. We use symbols to find different paths in which we can actually reach the person in the human and not only the category of the defendant or the victim. And we try to construct together and to understand from their perspective what happened. Now, if we talk about gender perspective, this was to give you a really super broad example of the principles of the working of the jurisdiction. I know you are interested in how we pursue the gender and we apply the gender perspective. And I would say first that we have a particular mandate in this regard that come from the peace agreement itself. And then you are going to see them reflected in our normative framework. But this was actually agreed in the peace agreement that we have to operate with this particular focus. So when you think about gender perspective for a judicial apparatus, well, the question is, what does this involve? And I would say this involves that we have to bear this in mind in every action, every procedure, and every decision that we make. And in practice, how will you do that? So I would say, like, first, we as judges, prosecutorial judges, this is more or less what we do for our prosecutorial judges, but all of the judges and every servant of the jurisdiction has to highlight the unequal power relations based on gender that contributed to specific forms of violence. So every action, every procedure, every decision that we make, we have to put the springs of why this happened, what particular circumstances contributed that we end up facing this type or this specific form of violence. And of course, this means also bringing attention to the differentiated and disproportionate impact that armed conflict had on girls, on women, on sex gender diverse population. I'm going to use this short term, sex gender diverse, because I know there are many ways to refer to it, but I think this is the easiest and more broad way to refer to it. We also, in our work, we have to establish criteria for the selection and prioritization of cases to be investigated. And those criteria involve to analyze the vulnerability of the victims and the gravity of the facts. And then we do this also putting the premise of a gender-based perspective. And this means that these type of crimes have to be prosecuted. So these are expressively not included in those crimes that could be amnesty, for instance. The law, the constitution and the law particularly talk about sexual violence, but in practice we think about this category not only to involve sexual violence, which I'm going to tell you afterwards. But, and we are very aware that this cannot be simply amnestied and overlooked. That's why we opened the case number 11 to put this focus in the channel. And when you think about this is the work that we do, how we prosecute, how we put this focus on the violence that we are analyzing. But we also have to bear in mind that you have victims participating in these proceedings. And we have to prioritize the effective participation of women and of sex gender diverse individuals and population in our proceedings. So what we do is that we address their specific needs. We incorporate the standards for the investigation of this type of violence to ensure and to promote their participation. For instance, we protect their privacy, we protect their security, we prevent the re-victimization of them, with particular mechanisms that we can talk about in the Q&A that we want to have. I think this is a nice, important feature to say, for you to know that this is also possible not only because of the mandate that we have for the final peace agreement, but because we are the first national high court that has equality in terms of gender within the judges. So we are 54% female judges. We are 15% judges that come from indigenous population or Afro-descendant population, and 61 of us come from the regions of Colombia, not only the capital. So I think it gives us a particular commitment and perspective and different way to see the violence. And also you can see when you have all of this in place, we have the intersection of different views coming into place. So it's also nice to have the picture when you see a lot of female faces. This is not usually the case for high courts in different countries, and particularly in Colombia. I'm going to just briefly show you this. Under those principles that we were talking about, we have opened 11 cases. If you go to the website of the tribunals, you're going to find these. These are not pictures, drawings from different moments of different hearings of the 10 cases that were opened for the case number 11. That is the one I want to talk about, I mean, more in depth. But what I want to tell you here is that we investigate and we try to investigate 50 years of conflict to address the whole violence in 11 cases, which is something, to be honest, I'm really proud of the chamber that managed to find a methodology that was accepted, of course, not without objections, questions, but I think we all can agree that this is a good manner to address the mandate that we have, that is to give justice for all conflict-related crimes committed in more than 50 years of conflict, involving all different parties and all different victims. So what we did is we had different waves of cases, from 1 to 7, and for instance, working in the case number 7, we were focusing on different types of perpetrators, or different types of conduct, or different types of regions. So for instance, case number 1, case number 3, case number 7, those are focused on kidnapping, hostage taking, false positive, recruitment of children against the FARC or state agents or military. So if you think about territorial approach, you have to look at case number 2 and case number 4 and case number 5, different parts of the regions, different regions of Colombia that were affected by the violence. In a second wave of cases, you're going to find case number 8, 9, and 10. What happened here? That we realized that we have to finish our work in 15 years. It has been already 6 years because we have a temporal mandate. We cannot continue forever doing our job. So we put together more like a pattern analysis in our cases. So in case number 8, we focus on the rest of conducts that were committed by the military forces in the country. In case number 10, we focus on the rest of conducts committed by the FARC, former FARC members. And case number 9 is a particular focus that we have on indigenous population. If you want to know more about particular outcomes in terms of investigations of gender-based violence. Within these cases, we can talk about because we have specific decisions that we have issued in those. But I know that you are more interested in case number 11, and we have a bit, maybe 5 minutes more, no more than that. So I'm going to focus on the last chapter of our investigation, which is the case that we opened on gender-based violence. This case we opened in 2000, 2 months ago, I'm sorry, in September. Actually, we opened this case after having been working in the preparation of it for more than 3 years. So specifically gathering information, systematizing information, analyzing information, trying to find some hypotheses, preliminary hypotheses on how we are going to address this. This is just an example I have from case number 7, but it gives you an idea of how important gender-based approach is for us. This is a hearing that I had with LGBTI population that were these were persons victims of recruitment, and they were talking about their experiences within the ranks. And this particular person, Sebastian, this is not the real name, but he accepted to tell us our story in a form of Instagram story, and to tell us a bit more how it was to be gay and a kid, a minor, within the ranks of the FARC, how its sexuality and identity developed within this environment, and what happened while he was looking for justice. Why? He wanted to find peace and help others to find peace as well. And after we talked to him, we have the hearing, we considered the information, he said that the participation was giving him trust and hope and trying to live all his fears to find peace. And he was waiting that other victims could actually talk about their experiences of being gay and victimized also because of being gay in other kind of contexts. So we had a lot of previous work, lessons learned in our previous work that were applied to the opening of case number 11. And the first message that I want to give you about this case is that we are applying these lessons learned in other cases, and we have a great awareness of the challenges and complexities that we are facing when prosecuting this type of violence. It's also important to bear in mind that when we talk about gender-based violence, we are not focusing only on sexual violence. This is very important for us, because sometimes when you refer to this case, and we hear on the public debate, it's the sexual violence case, but this is for us, it's a gender approach and focus to the violence that we committed. We have also reproductive violence documented. We have other type of violence grounded in gender and prejudice because of sexual orientation and because of the gender identity of all the victims. So we are not only focusing on sexual violence. And the third important thing to bear in mind when we think about this case number 11 is that we also focus on the motivations of the perpetrators. And when we talk about the motivation of the perpetrators, we are not talking about the individual person, but the understanding of this person in a particular organization, armed structure, legal or not, in a particular context with particular goals. And then when you put everything in place, you're not talking about someone that was deviated in a way from the structure of the organization that was acting, but someone that was acting actually within the armed structure. It gives you a completely different perspective when you think about this. And then when you think about the victims of these crimes, from the very beginning in the opening of the investigation, we are very aware of the asymmetry between perpetrators and between the victims. And we put in place in the first place the position of subordination and disadvantage of the victims. And because of this position, it was easier and more grave the possibilities of discrimination and of violence. It is not a coincidence that we find that the majority of the victims were women children, or LGBTI population. So what we are trying to put in the public debate and pursuing with the case is a way of understanding that the conflict, the war served to perpetuate and amplify this type of discrimination. And that's why this is not a coincidence. When we talk about the case, when we recently opened the case, we started to receive questions about some of the categories that we use in the case that we consider to be important as a conceptual foundation of the case. I'm not talking about, for instance, patriarchy, very important, but very unknown category. So journalists and people were talking about why the tribunal is involved in this. You're going to also find categories such as the warrior masculinity, that is involved and how this relates to violence against women, the disciplinary practices that we found in the preliminary assessment that we made of the accounts of the victims, and the lack of corrective ability when the armed structure found this type of violence. Just to finish and to give you an idea how we are going to do this, we have analyzed more than 300 accounts of victims that we found in different types of databases in the country. We put in place and we made public one number that gives you an idea of the magnitude of the violence that we are prosecuting, the type of violence, not the one that we are prosecuting. We talked about more than 35,000 of victims that we have documented in all the country, from the 57 to 2016. This is not to say that we have jurisdiction over all these type of crimes, but we found this data, and we consider it to be important to tell to the country that this is the magnitude and scale of this type of violence that is, it has been historically underreported. So we put in place, it took us years to actually manage to do this. And we found that from this number of people, 89% were women. The victims, this is not a coincidence. This is part of a system. This is part of the structure. And from then, 35% of them suffered the violence when they were children. So if you put this particular focus, then you start to understand better what you are doing. We have a lot of challenges that we have to try to overcome in doing this. The first one is to bring more information to the case. So we are talking to the civil society, we are talking to the organization. We have to better document what we already have. Because when you document a case in terms of this type of prosecution, you need a different perspective and approach. You need to understand the context and the structure and the person and the harm and the impact and the vision for the future and the vision of the past, even before the actual victimization. So we need to talk to some of the victims again, and we are bringing this message every time we have the possibility to share it. Please come participate. We have put in place different measures, protective measures, psychosocial measures. So we are working with the tribunal to offer a better and improved way of doing justice for this crime. Just to close, I want to highlight the symbolic significance of opening this case for this country, because it puts a focus in a violence that was traditionally overlooked. And it has been well received by the countries, and we are starting this process of educating also in a way the country and sharing these messages, not for the country and national and international. And the importance of bearing in mind that even in transitional justice context, even in negotiated peace, you have to prosecute and to give a response of justice for gender-based violence. This is not something you can just ignore, as it has been ignored in the past, in 2017. I could give you a lot of information about different aspects of the case, of the challenges, or other cases that we already have charges for different types of crimes, very novel, even for the international criminal law environment. So if you have questions, we can start the conversation. So I would say this just to put some ideas out there for you.
Thanks so much, Judge Rueda, for this very interesting presentation on the work of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. I think it's a great overview also for those of us who are working about the peace process in Colombia. Before we begin with the questions that maybe all of you or some of you have, and also our audience in this on the streaming, I want to make like a brief comment and also a question. Because I feel that what you're presenting is so promising. It sounds like a great contribution to a context in which impunity, as you just said, has reigned for too much time, and also where it has been so continuous and so difficult to break the silence, and not only from the victims, but especially from the perpetrators. So thinking about this, I was wondering, and you also mentioned, and you showed us this picture where we see how the Special Jurisdiction for Peace works, this dialogic model. I think it's also something that we want to learn a lot about. But I was wondering, how do you imagine this process by which perpetrators are going to speak up finally about this violence? And also I was wondering, since gender-based violence and sexual violence, as you just said, are taking place in a context and in a structure of discrimination that is so relevant for this investigation, whether maybe in these dialogues, there's also a space for other actors, sectors. How can the society as such also somehow participate here, since you said like this is patriarchy, this is maybe also race-based hierarchies that are involved, which as structures are also fed by what individuals as such share and contribute to in terms of discriminatory ideologies and behaviors. So that was my thoughts, my doubts, and now I would gather maybe some questions from you and from those who are listening to us in the streaming.
There's no question for me alone with the question that you guys. It's more busy. I have to give them a microphone. I repeat the question, yeah? What do I have to do? Yeah.
Just in the middle, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Do I have to go it?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that coming along with the question of Diana, I was wondering more about the cutting perspective of gender in the other cases, how you are creating this connection with the other 9 cases, and how you involve the people who already participating in different dialogues and also in the hearings that you had before. And also I'm wondering about the difference that you can say in the regions in Colombia, because also patriarchy is differentiated according to the region in which you are located. And I believe that in Colombia, because Colombia is a country of regions, no? A kind of cliche, but it is sometimes it's the reality, no? But just considering the differences, how you approach this, knowing that La Head is in Bogota, and maybe people who are really far away, they have other understandings of what is the meaning of gender and also gender violence, how you create meanings, inclusive meanings, about gender in this case. I don't know if I am clear with this.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
No, nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, and so, Nora, I'm doing a PhD in Frankfurt. Thank you very much for being here. Yes, I have two questions. The first one is also related to the challenges because one of them, and as you mentioned, is the participation of victims in this process. And one of the criticisms it was raised was that this participation was always through organizations such as Afirmativo, Colombia Diversa, Sigma, and so on. So, which are these barriers for the participation or the effective participation of women? And the second question is regarding the projects, the reparation projects. I don't know because I'm not familiar to the head. But as I'm working in the reincorporation or reintegration process of former FARC combatants in the PhD, I usually go to the field. Yeah, it's not good to say to the field, but to the regions or the territories, and they talk about the thoughts. So I don't know if it's the same, but I wanted to know if the victims have like a say in these reparations or in this project, saying like, for instance, we want water supply, we want electricity or something like that. So those will be my two main questions. And of course, this one, the later one, related to this gender perspective. Of course, it's like too soon to talk right now about like the projects and the reparation. But I was thinking if like women and sexual or gender diverse population will have a say on these projects.
I would start first, perhaps.
Okay.
Give it chance to.
Are we going to have a second round?
Yes.
Okay, no, because of the time, because you have raised a lot of challenging aspects of everything that we do. So I will make some remarks on this. How to break the silence? Well, that was the first question. And of course, this is very important because when you have a dialogue-based process, it's not going to work if everyone is silent. And what we have found so far is that this is the most difficult violence to talk about, to be honest. And we have been thinking why, you know? Because sometimes, and this is my personal answer to that, or reflection to that, what I have seen in other cases, and the case of the recruitment of children, and the case of sexual violence that I'm also participating in this case now, is because in other type of violence, you can somehow give a justification in terms of the war. So for instance, in the case number one, the hostage taking, the justification, the explanation is that, of course, you need to finance the war. So you would kidnap someone to ask for money in exchange of this person, and this is a means of financing. The same in case number three. What we have found at the beginning of the conversation with the perpetrator was like, yeah, we needed to present results to our institution. So we needed to find this positive anywhere we could find them. And it was something, it sounds really harsh, but this is how they say it. Easy to bring and to present in this way. But when you think about what would you attack violently and sexually a minor or a woman in terms of the war, the answer is quite different. It's not there yet. So that's why we are at the beginning, very beginning of this case, trying to put this. We are not talking about individual isolated perpetrators. We have to find the explanation within the violent structure that we are examining. This is the first thing. Of course, it has to initiate, but educational approach Because sometimes even victims or perpetrators are not aware that what happened to them or what they did is actually a crime. Of course, you have, when you think about gender-based approach or sexual violence, you think about rape, it's very obvious. But because we are trying to go in depth in the analysis, we have to go to different types of levels of violence. And this is what we are thinking now, how to break the silence, and particularly how to bring these difficult conversations to the table of the country. And we are working with the victims. This is the first thing, because you need to report, and of course you need to report in terms of the prosecution that you are going to pursue. But we also talk to the defense lawyers, and we also talk to the perpetrators or to the defendants. So for instance, in case number 7 that we have been doing this work for almost 2 years now, we have a particular section of the hearing in which we sit down and talk to them, in which we start explaining these type of things. Yeah. Sometimes it's not very easy. It's never easy, to be honest. And they would say to us, why would we be different to the rest of the society? Because it was happening even before we were here, and it continued happening after we left. And we continue the conversation. And this is a conversation, and a formal conversation within a hearing, in which we try to reflect on these type of things. I think this is a process, to be honest. I think we are advanced when you compare to what we were in the beginning, but we have a lot of work to do. And we think we can promote the conversation, bringing the accounts of the victims to the table. This is, like, I think, the most legitimate way to do it. When they explain what happened to them, it makes sense to everyone in the world. You don't need very complicated academic categories sometimes. You just need the human history and the explanation of them, and then it clicks. But this is a process, and we are working on this. And then we have the challenge to bring this to the society, and we have to find, I would say personally, a different way. And this is something we are discussing now, because as you were seeing in the picture before, the design in the law of a hearing is a public hearing in which the perpetrator talks to the victim says to the perpetrator what they feel, what they expect, and they also express their remorse, and they ask for forgiveness. But sometimes what the victim asks from us is confidentiality, for instance, anonymity. So, to be honest, I think we have to design something different. It's not going to be the same model. It has to make sense for them in the first place, for both parties, not only for the victim, but also for the defendant, because you don't want a public humiliation. This is not what we pursue at the tribunal. We want a reflection process, but we also have to communicate this. So I see this in a different way, and this is the reflection that we are having in the tribunal now. Maybe to try to make it public in a different way, how to pass these messages without passing the identity of the victim, for instance. And we are working on that, even from the beginning of case number 11. To be honest, I think like the country is going to see something different to this hearing. In terms of how we put together the whole country in this, I think it's a very important question. You are going to see in the opening of the case, in the decision that we render, that we talk about different possibilities. So we talk about intersection between cases or among cases, regional cases with cases by conduct and cases by perpetrators, because we are really aware that one case is not going to be able to show the whole picture. So you're going to find a particular chapter in every, we call it subcase of the big case, because we also divide the whole case in 3 different subcases. In terms of the context of the violence that we found, we are going to investigate this in 3 general ways. The violence that was committed by the former FARC members against the civilian population in the first subcase. In the second subcase, you're going to find the violence that was committed by the military forces against civilian population. And then in the third case, the one I'm in charge of, we are going to see the violence that was committed by the FARC and by the military forces within the ranks in both military structures. And this is a methodological approach that we decided to put in place in order to advance somehow and divide the work. But then we are very aware that these three subcases have to cut and have to encounter with other cases, where you are going to find a chapter in every subcase in which we all talk about the possibility of joint charges and joint prosecutions, because we are going to sit down with our colleagues, the colleague that is prosecuting what happened in Nariño, and going to sit down and say, okay, what did you find? What do I have here? What we have in common? What is different? And this is important for us because we don't want to separate context. This is a particular challenge of this type of investigation. If you artificially separate context, then you also put in place the bias. So we have to put everything together. I think this is one of the biggest challenges of this case, to make this come true. And then we have to take into consideration the different regions. And it would depend also on the information that we have. If we have enough information to prioritize a particular region or not. In this point of the case, this is a national case. We don't have yet strategy of regional prioritization of the case. But if we have enough information to put some focus first, we were going to do it in a public decision, as we have done in other cases. About the participation of victims, we are really aware of this. Of two things. First, that organizations have made an incredible job in bringing accounts and victims to participate. So we do recognize the efforts and the possibilities, and we work with them. We have been talking to them in all the cases. They participate, they litigate, they represent the victims before the court. Actually, with a part of the court, administrative part of the court, we provide for the funding for these organizations to provide for lawyers at the same time that come before the court and litigate with us. But we have also seen at the same time that we need to talk to the victims directly. And this is something I've done, for instance, in case number 7, with the organization by their side, but also with a methodology in which we sit down with the victim and we ask and we pursue the information that we need in the way with the protective measures in order to pursue this type of investigation that sometimes is not reported the way we need it before it comes to the tribunal, in the reports or in the accounts. So we do both, actually. And we, and case number 11 is going to do the same. And we are improving our strategies. And we have given different orders to different parts of the tribunal in order to improve the psychosocial support, for instance, so we can actually talk to the victim and not to the lawyer. So we are very aware of that. And in terms of reparation project, this is another one of the challenges of the case, because when you talk about restorative sanctions, you have to think also about the recognition. And in order to have a recognition of the violence, of the account, of the charges, not only the facts, but also the legal charges that we are presenting, you need to go through all this process, which is very complicated. And when you mentioned towards, this is a particular way in which the tribunal is thinking the possibility to somehow advance a sentence and a restorative project, even before the recognition takes place, or even before the sentence itself. We call it anticipated towards. Towards means in Spanish, trabajo, obra o actividad con contenido reparado. And we are trying to do both. We are having this discussion within the tribunal on how to hear the victims and the organization of what could be possible at this stage. And we do have within the projects that we are managing, this is not something that my chamber does directly. This is something that if we have recognition of truth and responsibility, we send these charges to another part of the tribunal, which are my colleagues from the section. We divide in chambers and sections. And they are in charge of putting in place the sentence and then make the restorative sanction a reality. And I know the section and I know the whole institution is thinking about this. And we have a methodological approach to how this is going to work. And one of the lines of this restorative project is related to gender approach and sexual violence and other type of intersections in different type of approaches. So yeah, we are thinking about this. We are very aware of the challenge. We are talking to the victims, but we also have to bear in mind that this has to be a public policy. And of course, it is going to be a very, very difficult to bring to every victim every possible desire and aspiration. So we have to manage a way in which bring together groups of expectations so we can respond to them. And this is as much as I can say. We don't have a sentence yet, and we are working in this way. But yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing now.
Thanks so much. We are a bit on time, but if you all agree, we can maybe take a few minutes more.
Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. I know it's a very big question, but I just want to mention, I know we have no time here maybe, but I wonder about the tension between the ongoing normal criminal justice procedure in the country. For example, for people who stole a bread from a shop. And this special jurisdiction, because I have read something about it. There's a tension because someone, as you mentioned, there's an amnesty process, and it is brought for some crimes like killing people. Of course, the mentality and logic of and working organization of this tribunal and this jurisdiction is very different. I know, I understand it, but is there a tension about this, and are there any discussions or any experience, any solutions for these? Because people may say that, yeah, I have just stolen this dress from the shop, and you put me in prison, for example, but this man killed 10 people, and then you forgive him. It's a very difficult question, I know. I also think about it for the Turkey-Kurdish conflict. What will we do about it when we have a peace process, something like that? It's very, very difficult, I know. Just to mention it, maybe you may suggest some resources to read, something like that. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much also for the presentation. I have like a more general question. In the dialogic model that you presented of the HEP, you have like clear categories, right? Victims and perpetrators. So how do you deal in those cases, as I can imagine you have in the case 7, where perpetrators were also victims, so where these categories are a bit blurred, right? So do they have the chance to take both positions depending on the case? Even in the case of, for example, within, like, I don't know, you know, within the military, for example, there are many cases also of sexual violence against men that in turn can also become perpetrators, right? So how do you deal with this? So with these complexities of armed conflicts also, where it's not so black and white, but you have like all these nuances.
Thank you very much for your presentation. 2 questions. The first one, how do you balance the collective and the individual dimension of your cases? You have a connectivity of victims and you have a connectivity of perpetrators, but at the same time, the victim is an individual and the perpetrator is an individual, and somehow this must be balanced. The other a question is probably not a question, but more of a comment, because you raised the issue of confidentiality in respect of gender-based violence. I indeed believe that this is very important. If you want to deal with gender-based violence, there are more limits to it, what you can actually expect from victims or perpetrators, then basically. It's probably not as public as we can imagine. There are means and ways this has occasionally been dealt with, but what I see from, among others, the work of the tribunals in The Hague, it is very complex to deal with these cases. I can probably just tell one story of a student who actually was asked in a paper to comment on developments of the Yugoslav tribunal on sexual violence, and the student returned the paper because it was a male student, and he didn't want to deal with this, as he felt, even as a student, as an academic, hampered by the horrible facts of the cases. We get used to listen to other forms of violence, but once it gets to sexual-based violence or gender-based violence, we actually run into serious problems, all of us. And I think this is something I will be very much interested in how you handle this, because I believe this is truly complex. And I wish you all the best for it. Any more questions from this side?
Yeah, that's it. Okay, I'm going to go from some specificities to the more general question that you ask. Yeah, definitely case number 11 is going to be very challenging in terms of how to maintain confidentiality, but at the same time, how to tell the country what happened, and not only Colombia, the rest of the country that could be interested in this type of prosecutions. I would say, to be honest, that the work of the tribunal every day is a balancing work. We have all different types of tension that you can imagine. Publicity versus confidentiality, the individual versus the collective. And this relates to your question in a way, because we don't deal with individual criminality, with a particular fact. We are trying to put in place a mechanism that is able to provide us justice for a systematic abuse. And when I was talking about politically motivated violence, we are talking criminality in mass. I started with the numbers. We're talking about more than 9 million of victims. In the jurisdiction now, we have actively participated more than 300,000 victims participating. So you can imagine how we, as the Secretary of Justice, have to deal with every day this balancing act, and how to explain and how to respond to our work. So one of the first balancing responses or balanced response that we have to give is this: how we prosecute this, and at the same time how we tell the story to the country. I've been doing this for 2 years in case number 7, with the recruitment of children. At the very beginning of the investigation, just to give you an example, because we recently started with case number 11, so I'm going to tell you what we have done there, but we have been having more experience in case number 11, in case number 7, sorry. What we did at the very beginning of when I started the case was to go back to the accounts of the victims. Okay? And what we found when we put these particular prints of what happened to the children, to this child, within the ranks, because we don't only investigate the fact of the person of the kid going to the ranks, but the life within the ranks. And we went back to the accounts. We are talking in that moment, we had more than 200 victims participating. Now it's something close to 800 victims participating in the case. We found some violence that were prevalent within the ranks. And we systematized this information, and we found sexual violence and gender-based violence, such as the case of Sebastián that I presented you briefly here. So what we did is that we put these accounts in place. We made a public decision, a methodological decision, and we said we are going to open lines of specific lines of investigations in order to bring those testimonies and to put a particular focus there. And we opened the line of investigation of gender violence, gender-based violence, and one particular line of investigation of the LGBTI population and the violence that they suffer. And we brought to the methodological decision some of the parts of the accounts of the victims, not the most detailed accounts, to be honest, just to give you an idea of the decision that we had these testimonies and this information was coming from the victims. So you can find this, I can give you the decision, these decisions are public. We, of course, anonymize the information, the identity of the person, but we said to the country, we are finding this and we are going to investigate this. And then we have this type of, I would say, creative, in a way, pieces or ways to communicate, because the society is also waiting for us. And the majority of the investigation and the information that we have gathered is completely reserved. Some are part of this, even to the defense. There is some part of the information that we don't give even to the defense. And this has been also an issue with the procedural matters that we have to follow. But we have to tell the country, yes, we are finding some things, we are finding this type of stories. And this, for instance, we did with him, with the victim. After the hearing, we talked to him in, I think, 2 or 3 spaces, official spaces of hearing. And then he said he would be interested in sharing his story. Actually, it was his initiative because he wanted to promote participation, because for him it made a difference, the participation for that. And this is a way in which we try to put, I don't know if you understand Spanish, but we talk about the sexual violence, the death that we had to see, the killing that we had to see, the strategies that we had to use in order to survive, just in 2 paragraphs. And in a more approachable way, to say so. So I think we have to deliver this and more in order to communicate. I don't know how is the specific shape that is going to take, but a lot of information is going to be to continue to be private and reserved, even after the sentence that we find. And in the same way, when we think about tensions and the individual and the collective, you think of the way in which we have to administrate the participation of the victims. Because when we have sexual violence victims, for instance, we can still give, and we must give individual face-to-face. We try to do this. But in other cases, we have thousands of victims participating. And what we do there is to manage some ways. Collective representatives. We talk to the organization, so they organize. We have spoken persons within the victims, so they come to us. Even though with that, we have to revise case by case of the applications in order to participate, because in order for a person to participate as a victim within the tribunal, we issue a decision and we say, okay, we have your account. We have something that we call like a summary. I don't know how to translate this in Spanish. It's prueba sumaria. I don't know if you can help me here. There's a lawyer here. It means that you have some sort of evidence that hasn't been gone to a trial, but you have some sort of evidence that could support the testimony of the person. And you have to write a decision, and you have to put so that the person can participate. So we balance all the time, the individual and the collective. And for instance, in this hearing, the one that I showed you before, we had more than something close to 200 victims participating. And then we have to put in place everything to make possible the participation. This is part of the work that we have to make. And the other tension, victims are perpetrators. And I have experienced this in particular in case number 7, in the recruitment of children. And what we have decided in the case, what I have decided in the case, is that if a person is coming before this case as a victim, I am going to inquire about the victimization, no more than that. I am very respectful of that. And they have the lawyers that advise them in order what they want to share, because this is voluntary, so I respect whatever the victim wants to tell me. Sometimes I have found moments in which they want to share a bit more about some things that bring them guilt. I'm going to put it in these terms. And more like a emotional way to see it. So they want to tell me this and ask me about the circumstances, about the implications. And we manage this not from a legal perspective, because I'm not investigating this part of the violence, but more with the support of the psychologist on how to deal with the guilt and the memories and the emotions that these acts that they committed bring to them. But yeah, I can tell you a bit more of this. We also put in place methodologies. So when we are working with them, we don't work with other groups of victims. Yeah, so that's why we also have a particular subcase in case number 11, in which we have, because you could be victim of sexual abuse, but at the same time you could be perpetrator of other types of violence, right? So we divided context, so it's easier to manage, and we don't sit together possible victims and perpetrators. So we are managing methodologies. The more than we learn, the best we put in place hearings and things. And just to finish the question of transitional justice, what you raised is the question of transitional justice. Why this is justice? That's the question that you raised. Like, why we could call this justice? And I would say to you that it is because of the particular context and the real possibility of the state that is implementing this. I have this question a lot from the victims, not only because in comparison to other types of crimes, but in comparison to their own expectations of justice. Like, why would I come here if this person is not going to jail? And when I talk to them, I'm not trying to convince anyone, to be honest. So I'm very respectful of the opinions and the feelings that you could have for this type of mechanism. I know it's very controversial. It is still very controversial in Colombia. But we are operating, and I think we are delivering results that a traditional model of justice could never give to the country, to be honest. The more I'm involved in this, the more I realize that it makes sense. I'm not trying to convince you, again, just giving you my personal opinion. Why it makes sense? That's the question. I would say, first, because of the reality. Because sometimes when you think about transitions, you think about what is the real possibility you have to this. Is it ordinary justice? Is it, as in Colombia, the 60 years of the privation of liberty that is statute in the criminal code? And the question is no. It's not a reality that the state is going to be able to prosecute, to capture, to prosecute, and to bring sentences to more than 10,000 people that were involved in the conflict. That was this is the first. What is the option 2? Is that a reality or not? Is that a possibility or not? In the country, it was. In our country, maybe in other contexts, it could be. So this is the first thing, that this is the reality. And second, even with that reality, within that reality, you have always the limitations, the resources, and the possibilities. We tried in the past in Colombia to prosecute in a different peace process, everyone for everything. It has been more than or something close to 18 years from the Justice and Peace Law. I'm sure you're aware of this. They haven't finished. The country doesn't know. There are a lot of expectations that are not fulfilled. While we are delivering in the process, as we advance, and we are trying to put this in public debates, because that never happened before. And we are talking about this, bring this to the public debate, talking about gender, talking about discrimination, because we have the possibility with these macro cases. And when we talk to the victims, and I would like to close with this, at the beginning, I was also thinking, how do I explain to this person that this makes sense for all of us? And at the end of the participation, even without a sentence, even without charges, when you give meaningful participation to a person in a process, when you are wearing the robe and you sit down and hear the person telling you, and this person feels that it is being received by the state in a way, it makes a difference to it. And I have experienced this with the victims in the cases that I'm prosecuting, to be honest. And sometimes they leave the hearing and they say to me, it's okay, what happens after this? It's okay, I'm going to accept it, I'm going to live with it. This space that I had with you, that I had with the jurisdiction, this makes sense. That will make me feel better. It made me go home feeling dignified in a way. So I would say, it's a difficult question, it's a difficult answer. We could share it or not, but I think for Colombia it's making sense now.
Thanks so much again, Judge Rueda, for sharing all these insights from the work of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, and also for closing with these very hopeful remarks. And we are, looking forward to what comes out of this process. Thanks so much.